Ladies and gentlemen, I promise you this is the one you have been waiting for, because we're doing a proper budget-friendly gaming PC for as low a price as possible. We're not cheating, we have a GPU. This is going to be so good for 1080p gaming pretty much across the board. And actually, in terms of price point, this comes in at around about £500, $550-ish. I mean, Editor Carl, is that actually right? Yeah, I've literally spent the last 2 or 3 weeks choosing all of these parts, testing a few different things, perfecting this, and I'm really excited to actually see whether this is going to be as good as I expect. So throughout this video, we're going to go through all of the parts that you need to put together the cheapest new gaming PC that you can buy in 2024. We'll show you how to put it together, just how easy PC building can be, and of course show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you know exactly what you're going to get for your money. I think it's time to get our build on, ladies and gentlemen, right after a short word from this video's sponsor. MSI's jaw-dropping RTX 4080 Super Expert is here, and I mean just look at it. It is stunning. With a finely crafted metal body and timeless design, this card is sure to be the centerpiece of your rig, featuring a pass-through cooling layout to ensure gaming stays cool and quiet. Not only that, but thanks to the power of Nvidia's Super Series, you're fully equipped for ray tracing, DLSS super resolution, and frame generation. Learn more today with the link down below. So yes, genuinely ecstatic about this one. I think you're going to love it. But obviously when you are getting into PC gaming, things can get quite expensive very quickly, and you're going to have to cut a lot of corners in order to actually make this possible. And some of these I think a few people are going to wince slightly at, but this is the reality, right? If you are trying to get as close to that £500 or dollar mark as possible, you can't spend £500 on a GPU. So the way we're getting around this is actually be going with Intel Arc, and up until a couple of, well, I'd say around about a year or so ago, this started to actually get quite good. The drivers improved, which meant the in-game performance was better, but fundamentally as well, the prices of these actually started to come down. So I saw one of these when I sort of started planning all of this for around about $160 on Newegg. It's since increased, I believe, ever so slightly, but keep an eye out because you can definitely get these at a really good price if you know where to look. This is an A580 GPU, and it is geared towards 1080p gaming really at like 60 to 100 frames a second, but actually it punches above its weight a little bit in 1440 as well if you have a high res monitor. Now, where things start to get a little bit cheap, shall we say, is with the motherboard and with the CPU. And I've never used a motherboard this cheap before. This is pretty much the cheapest one I could find. This was around about 65, 70 pounds here in the UK. It's Intel's H610 platform, so it's a fair bit older. And we're going for the definitely retail packaging of the i3 12100F. So this has 4 cores, enough power for gaming, but like it's not going to be ideal in like the latest and greatest titles. It's not a 6 core, it's not an 8. But fundamentally, as long as you are just gaming and you don't have loads of things going on at once, this is still gonna like trade blows with something like a Core i7 7700 from a few years back. And if you are playing older titles or just anything that doesn't need like a crazy CPU, this does punch well above its weight. In order to actually start your PC off, just grab your motherboard and place it on top of the motherboard box. This just makes it a bit easier to actually build everything. You can see what you're doing, you've got more light around you, and you don't have to sort of like be reaching in around this case. It's definitely a fair bit more complicated once you've put your motherboard inside your chassis. This is so light. There really is not much motherboard here, but it should do the job. I mean, you've only got 2 RAM slots, so it's actually technically better for latency, but obviously it means you can't upgrade it at a later date. There's no cooling, is there, for VRMs and things, so I wouldn't advise putting a Core i9 in here, even though it's probably technically possible. No SSD heat sinks or anything like that, but obviously if you are buying a motherboard like this, you're not going to be pairing it with like crazy high-end components anyway, so it doesn't really matter. IO's not fantastic either, like it's absolutely fine. You've actually got a DVI port there, which is pretty old-fashioned, but then you've got a total of 6 USB-A's, no USB Type-C at all. So as I say, drop this down on top of your box, then you can grab your Core i3 out of its box. It will not look like this. That was a joke. This is the sample Intel sent me a few years ago. Obviously, the one you will receive should look a little bit like this, and it should come with an Intel stock cooler that we will be using. Again, looks a little bit like that. I mean, some people will say, stock cooler, why on earth would you use that? I don't want that in my PC. But when a cooler will literally cost half the cost of your CPU, and this is not going to use much power in the first place anyway, so this should actually be fairly quiet. I mean, using a third-party cooler in an i3 just does not make sense unless you know you're going to be upgrading a little bit later. But then if that was the case, why are you buying an i3 in the first place? But anyway, mild rant aside, let's open up our slot just by pulling this back. But then you can just grab the CPU look, gently lower this down into the slot, push this back with a gentle amount of force, and then you just want to pull this lever back into position. And as you can see, this plastic piece will kind of pop off as you're doing this. And you can save this for later in case you need to upgrade your CPU and you may be selling it in the meantime, or more likely if you have an issue, just to send your motherboard back to the manufacturer. And the cooler itself should be easy enough to install. It's always a little bit finicky for some reason, and I never quite understand why. I'm going to have to use some thermal paste here, but you should not, because if you're buying this new, you'll actually have a little bit of thermal paste here. You can see this mark where it was pre-applied. But if you are reusing a cooler, then obviously you have to wipe that thermal paste off and reapply some, which is what we're doing here today. If you are in this camp and you're buying some used components, because of course that is the best way really to save money in your gaming PC, is to buy stuff on the used market. You can just put some thermal paste in the middle, then you pick up your CPU cooler and just gently line these posts up with the holes on your motherboard. Then the bit that's a bit more annoying is you have to push these posts down until they click into position. But then you find you push one in and then the other one sort of pops out the other side. Got 3 in, just need 1 more. I don't know what I hate worse, radiators or the Intel stock cooler. The Ryzen one just screws in. No! Right, I think we're there. That is the stock cooler installed. You'll know if it's not on properly, by the way, because it'll either fall off, which would be very, very bad, or more likely, when you actually get into your system, you're going to find that the CPU is running a little bit hot. So just make sure all of those pegs are actually in and secured properly before you proceed. Then you want to grab this cable and plug it in at the top where it says CPU fan, as this is what obviously controls the fan and thus your cooling. Okay, so once you've almost certainly flailed around a little bit, the good news is you've now done the trickiest bit. Congratulations. You can now move on to the RAM, and this is a brand new kit of DDR4, which I didn't think I would say. I've had to go out and buy one of these, and you can buy kits for about £32 to £35 here in the UK. This is from Corsair. It's their Vengeance DDR4. It's LPX as well, so if you are going to go for like a different CPU and cooler, then it's quite low profile, so it shouldn't have to worry about clashing as much. This is a kit that's meant to run at 3600 megahertz, but you're going to be fixed here with the CPU, so I believe it'll be 3200 megahertz. So I would advise getting a 3200 megahertz kit. To get it installed, just find this little notch on the RAM, line it up with a notch on these RAM slots, and then lower this down into position and give it a decent enough push until it clicks in twice, once at the bottom, once at the top. I should say, by the way, that this is 16 gigabytes of memory, so nothing crazy, but more than enough for an entry-level gaming PC. Now, rather annoyingly, when it comes to the SSD or the storage, prices do seem to be on the rise a little bit. The one I'm using here is the exact same one that I did my APU build. So this was a gaming PC, maybe slightly cheaper than this, but actually the same sort of price point. You can find this video in the top right corner of your screen. But this will save you as much money as possible, but I would much rather really you could get something like a Crucial P3+, even though that is Gen 4. So it will only run at Gen 3 speeds on this motherboard. You're still going to be getting a faster drive. It will just run at the slightly lower speed from the interface. But if you're only having to spend like £3 more to get that, then obviously that does make sense. But if you are trying to save as much money as possible, then something like this is a good idea. This is my SN550, but the newest version is the SN580. And I'm realizing actually that there is no sort of standoff for the screw for this SSD to sit in. So we're going to have to delve into our motherboard box. There should be like some SATA cables and things in here as well. Yes, you've got an I/O shield that we need to install in this case. But this is what I'm looking for, our standoff screw. We'll work out how long it is by just lining this up there. And you can see that the screw hole is here. So just screw that into place. Then you can pick up your SSD, line it up with that slot. It's really easy, doesn't require any force. And you get your little screw that came in that bag. Get that safe and secure. Then that is actually your motherboard complete and ready to go in our chassis. All you're going to need to do, if you haven't already, is grab that I/O shield and then put this in your case. And of course, we haven't actually spoken about the chassis yet. Once again, this is the same as we did in our previous budget-friendly video from last week, but this is still the case I think that most people should probably go for. Obviously, there are so many to pick from that It's not necessarily the perfect chassis. This does cut a lot of corners. This is the Cooler Master Q300L, and there is a newer version of this, but it costs almost double the price. You can get this at the moment for around about like 35 to 40 pounds here in the UK, which is very reasonable. But you can also see I've populated this with a power supply. The one that we're using is the EVGA 600W2, but I don't think they sell this one anymore, so you'd be looking at the W1 or a similar power supply that's at the very cheap end of the market, but fundamentally from a decent, respectable brand. So at least, as much as you can, you know you can trust it. All of these cables I've pre-routed. This literally just screwed in the bottom. It's really easy. Again, you can find the APU video in the top right corner of your screen if you do want to see how to do that, but it really is just 4 screws to get this safe and secure. You've got this really big hole at the back, so you can't miss it. And you just want to grab this piece of metal. You just give this a push, just like that, till it's kind of clicks in place, then lower this back down. And actually, on that note, this case doesn't have all of these standoffs pre-applied. They come with the chassis in exactly the same way that we did with our motherboard for that M.2 standoff. Make sure all of the ones that say M do actually have these standoffs screwed into place, other than this one, because most motherboards don't actually have this hole here. So I don't know why that's there, but there we go. You'll see if you've got it right, because when you pick up your motherboard, all of those standoffs should now line up with the holes on the motherboard, and the motherboard should line up with that I/O shield that you put at the back. We do also have this one here that kind of like catches the motherboard, so you know it's in the right position. You then want to use these little hex screws that come in the bag. It's actually a little bit unusual because most cases come with smaller size ones for the motherboard, but this Cooler Master case does come with pretty much just hex screws for this stuff. So you fit that down just by screwing it into position. Once you've done that, you can then stand it back up and take this other piece off. This is where all of your cables will be, and you'll see that I've done an excellent job of cable managing everything, but it really doesn't take very long. So you'll have like this big bundle, but essentially you're just grabbing all of the cables for the front panel and feeding them through to the other chamber in their respective places, which in this chassis is to have USB 3 just under this very large ATX power socket here. I'll get my light actually so you can see. Let's do the really annoying ones next. So things like your power and reset. You just plug it into this little block here that says JFP1. So the power goes at the top right of this block, so that's the power switch. Do check your motherboard manufacturer's manual because it makes it really easy for you. So at the top on the left of that, you're going to want your power LEDs. Directly under our power switch, we always have our reset switch, and then to the left of that, we always have our HD LEDs. But not all cases come with all of these different connections. Some of them will literally just be a power switch, whereas others like this will have all of them, and that's okay. Once that's completed, you're going to want to grab this one that says HD Audio, and it connects just here at the bottom left. There's also now a fan to plug in, which is this one at the back. And this motherboard actually rather helpfully has this little header up here that says System Fan 1, so you can just plug that in a very similar way to that we did with the CPU fan. This would now be the normal stage to grab your power supply out of the box and actually get this installed if you haven't already. And then, as I say, just do exactly the same thing that you've done before when it comes to cable routing. Get all of the cables through to the hole where they need to go. This is what keeps it neat. Don't have things like trailing across the motherboard unless you absolutely need to. Once you've done that, you should then be at the same stage that we are here now with this one that says motherboard, or some power supplies say ATX, and you really can't mess this one up because it's very obvious, and you just plug this in to the side of the motherboard. Once you've done that, you're going to want to grab this one that says CPU on it. Some of them say like EPS or 12 volt or something like that. This is the cable, and they are often separated into 2 of these little 4 pins. Just click them together if they clip, or just plug them in separately. Shouldn't really matter, but they just go at the top left of the motherboard. And this is definitely a case of so far so good. It's a case of so far so good. Plainly because we're almost done. I told you this was straightforward. Yes, the Intel stock cooler does annoy you, and I promise you it will. This is what the APU build we did with that Ryzen chip kind of looked like, but if you're going for an F version of the Intel CPU, then obviously you do need to put a dedicated graphics card in, whereas if it doesn't have the F suffix, you could technically now plug this in, actually use the back I/O here for your display, and it should work, but obviously you're not going to get very good graphics performance like that, so we're going for one of these, an Intel Arc A580. And I think I would probably rather have an RX 6600 in my rig personally, but if you can get one of these for around about 160 pounds or dollars or so, then you're laughing, because that's significantly cheaper than the 6600. Not crazy, but the performance is going to be similar anyway. And there are actually certain instances where this is way better than the Radeon cards. The main one actually being, for me, is that it has an AV1 encoder, so if you're wanting to capture gameplay, it's going to look way better on this. And when it comes to 1440p gaming, it can surprise you, and ray tracing actually, that in certain titles it will just easily beat AMD, but then in others it just performs really weirdly as well. We'll show you all of this in just a second, but actually as a first gaming PC like graphics card, I think you're going to be really happy with this, and you cannot argue with the price point. So this now comes the bit where we probably should have done this before. If you're watching this, do this before. You want to take these little slot covers out for your PCIe slots, and I say you want to do that before you put your motherboard in, because sometimes there are a few bits on the motherboard that are very close to this, and obviously you don't want to risk like damaging it or anything like that. This is very risky, and I would absolutely advise taking the motherboard out if you haven't at this stage, because when you take this off, it is actually hitting one of these capacitors here, and you really don't want to break it. So take these off before you start your build. But while I've actually got this lying down flat, this is the easiest way, and I would always recommend people do install their graphics card like this. We actually do it the other way just because it looks better on camera, but maybe we should explain that more often when we're doing it. When you're installing your graphics card, lying down is easier. You just want to take this little side piece off, then you can pick up your graphics card, obviously take off this like black rubber thing if you've still got the protector on, and then you're going to expose that PCIe slot. So you just line it up with that slot, give it a push till you get a nice satisfying thud, pick up this piece again, and then just gently screw that back in, and then add a couple of screws to this graphics card just to keep it safe and secure. And with that, you're actually pretty much done. You just need to supply some power to your GPU. And where I did my build last time, I wasn't actually using any of these PCIe cables, so I tucked them neatly out of the way, but of course I will need these now. So let's find the ones that say PCIe on them. This actually requires 2 8-pins, which is surprising, so a fair amount of power, which is why we're using this 600 watt unit, but I don't think we're actually be getting close to 600 watts for the whole PC. But you just line these up with that slot and give them a good push home. And then I think that is actually our completed gaming PC done. This already looks way better than the APU build that we did a few days ago, because obviously you have a graphics card, it looks a whole lot more complete. I've done some basic cable management, as you can see, but it's really pretty straightforward. You will be left with like a few cables here that you will have to just tuck in the side, but actually this case is quite good because you can just sort of park them here, and when you put your side panel on, you've got plenty of room to just like rest them in place. This isn't going to be the best chassis if you want to like upgrade it for years to come with a load of, I don't know, RGB fan controllers and radiators and things. But if you're just looking to build a gaming PC, then you've got so much airflow here that it doesn't really matter if you don't have too many fans, because it can sort of breathe from everywhere. Just one on the back should be okay. But I guess this is something we can test. Should we see if it works? As always, we will need to grab ourselves a monitor, a keyboard, mouse, and of course, the PC-centric mouse mat. If you're new to PC gaming, you all need a mouse mat. You can grab this one for a very reasonable price. It's my own, with that link down below. Get yours today. Always make sure that you've actually turned your power supply on at the switch, and your HDMI cable, if you are using a graphics card, or DisplayPort of course, make sure that's plugged into the graphics card, not the motherboard, or you won't get any display output and you'll be very confused. Moment of truth, will it work? We have something, we've got some noise, we've got some fans spinning, what we love to see, but until we've got a display on this monitor, anything goes. This could be a disaster, but hopefully, yes, there you go. That is what you want, either like a first boot sort of splash screen with some text like this, or because I've used this SSD and this chip before, it says CPU or memory changed. But fundamentally at this stage, you just want to check everything in the BIOS like shows up, all of the drives you put in, all of the devices, and make sure your CPU temperature is not like 90 degrees or something like that, because that would imply you haven't put the cooler on properly. And then you will need to go and download a copy of Windows onto a USB flash drive. This is free to do, to actually download it. You can go to the Microsoft website, grab Windows 11, follow the installation instructions on a Windows PC. Then you're going to want to put that in the back of your system, let the whole thing restart, so just turn it off and turn it back on again. It will boot into Windows, and then you can follow the on-screen instructions, and then you're ready to stop playing some games. And through the power of editing, ladies and gentlemen, we are then all set up and... oh, hello, that's new. We are all set up and ready to go. And yes, this is very much an ominous black box. It doesn't look particularly remarkable, but at the same time, I really like it. I mean, there's no RGB. You could obviously upgrade this a little bit later, but, you know, for the most part, it just sits there, it whirs away. It's definitely not the quietest because that Intel stock cooler is a little bit annoying, but when you're gaming, it's kind of like the same volume as the graphics card anyway, so if you are just using this as a gaming PC, it'll be fine, but obviously you can upgrade that at a later date if you wish. And as you can no doubt see, it is now time to actually jump straight into the game. So what you're seeing here is Fortnite, but importantly, this is actually running in the performance mode at the exact same settings we had on our APU build, and the difference is pretty much night and day. I mean, even though that was absolutely fine to play on, and I actually did win a game on that APU, if you are looking to build a gaming PC, you're going to want as high a frame rate as possible. At this sort of price point, I would definitely rather have this frame rate than what we had on the APU. Let's take this out of performance mode though and put it in DirectX 12. We'll then set everything to be high across the board, including TSR high with the temporal super resolution quality set to quality. And then let's have a look what that does. Well, immediately you can tell that the game looks way better because you've actually got detail literally across the board. And interestingly as well, we are still getting a pretty high frame rate. It's not crazy, but it is around about 80 to 90 frames a second or so. So if you're rocking like a 120 Hz monitor, I would still probably lower some of the settings down just to try and get as close to 120 FPS as possible. But when we are getting around about 100 frames a second or so at the moment, this is still a really playable experience. I mean, the game looks so much better now. It really is night and day. And when you compare this to what we had over on the APU, which again, the whole build was a very sort of similar price point, this really does show why you are going to be better off with a PC like this, because yes, you know, CPU performance isn't going to be as good, but when most games, really most games, will benefit from having a proper GPU, then I think that is a trade-off that most people will want to make. I mean, we're now looking at about 120 frames a second, and the game feels really smooth, and interestingly, we're not actually getting any bottlenecking on that CPU either, with around about 97, 99% of it being utilized. I have also turned Battle.net and Steam off, by the way. I've closed those applications. And as I say, I think that has actually helped a little bit. But of course, bottlenecking isn't going to affect you as much when you're at a lower frame rate, because you have a CPU frame rate and a GPU frame rate, and whichever one is lowest is the frame rate you're actually going to see on screen. I will draw your attention once again though to the top left-hand corner of your screen when we actually look at our CPU temperature, as that's currently hovering around about 90 degrees, and the PC is making a fair bit of noise, which is quite annoying. It's nowhere near as bad as some of the other ones that I've built with like much bigger GPUs and higher sort of TDP components. It's something you'll easily be able to sort of get rid of, and you know, as soon as you've got any headphones on or you've got proper speakers. But it is a pain in the bum that is so high. So yes, a proper CPU cooler as a viable upgrade in a couple of months' time would be good. Let's see how it fares with everything else. Our next title then is bound to be a popular one, some CSGO 2, and this is something that ran just about passably on the APU, but I wouldn't say it was a great experience. Whereas here, we actually seem to be getting a really nice frame rate. It's not going to win any awards for like 1,000 frames a second or anything like that, but with the same detail settings we had over on the APU, we're actually getting around about 100 to 120 frames a second or so. And obviously it is going to depend on the map and your exact settings and things. But the point being is that this is still going to be a really nice, smooth experience. It allows you to pair it up with a high refresh rate monitor like this. This is 1080p, 144 Hz. And while I'm never going to be any good at CSGO, it does give you a very clear indication that this is going to be a great starter PC for someone that doesn't want to play on console, but doesn't really want to compromise on frame rates either. I do want to take this opportunity to open up something a little bit more CPU heavy though, with some Beam NG drive, because this is something that has a lot of physics going on and it is quite demanding on the CPU. But actually, I'm surprised. It seems to be running better than I would have thought. I mean, we're currently getting about 120 to 140 frames a second. This is on the normal preset. This is, of course, at 1080p. It seems to be a really nice, smooth experience. I mean, I'm not saying you're never going to get stutters, because quad-core CPUs, as I say, these days on modern titles, I think it is inevitable if you've got other processes going on, or it just sort of has like a bit of a hiccup every now and then. But generally speaking, this runs really, really well. I mean, you could actually turn this up if you wanted to, but if you are going to drive, then obviously you probably want a slightly higher frame rate. But I must admit, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised. This is the weird thing, right? I mean, obviously you could go out and buy a used graphics card and the performance you'd find wouldn't necessarily be as good as this, but you could save yourself a bit of money. But there are loads of people out there that do just want to buy stuff that's completely new, get your warranties and things, and sort of know that you're in safe hands and haven't got to worry about like potential issues. So the fact that you can actually get this level of performance from really what is the most budget-friendly gaming PC you can build, and there are so many upgrades you can do as well, because of course you do have that Intel sockets, but maybe the upcoming like 14400F or like a 13400F, something like that really at a later date would be a fine upgrade, especially if you can get one on that used market. I'm genuinely really impressed. Let me know down in the comments. Are you ready? Oh! You can slow time down and watch it, and it really is quite something, isn't it? Just like that. But enough funny business, let's press on to something a fair bit more intense. This is some Diablo, and this is definitely the sort of game that people are going to want to build a gaming PC for on a budget. And we are absolutely smashing it when it comes to frame rate. We are actually getting a little bit of stutter. We did find this on the APU as well, but we're not getting anything quite as bad as we had before. Generally speaking, it seems to be smooth enough. It's not perfect, but it's certainly not too bad. And again, we can do a bit of an apples to apples, because these are the exact same settings that we had on the other system. We're currently getting about 144 frames a second, whereas before we were getting pretty much half that, weren't we, on the APU? Let's go into the options menu though and see if we can actually improve things slightly, because I would much rather use Intel XeSS over ASRock. That does tend to be a fair bit sharper. And then in terms of everything else, we can turn the textures up as we've got plenty of VRAM. Filtering, I mean actually across the board, let's just try high settings and see how that performs. Hit save, and yes, there you go. That now looks definitely a fair bit better. I mean, I would still probably actually turn XeSS off and just have it running natively, but our frame rate at the moment has stayed roughly about the same to what we had before, which is cool. Now we've got a load more effects and things going on though. How will that CPU fare? Are we going to get a load of stutter? No, and the stutter actually did seem to go away. I think it was just like again, when you sort of first boot up the games type thing, once your textures are properly loaded in and stuff, does seem to be working a fair bit better. Our 1% lows are around about 70, which is still really nice and smooth, especially for a game like this. But let's turn resolution scaling off entirely. And yeah, I definitely can notice a difference. It's not like it's ginormous, but when you're playing at 1080p, it's not like you've got loads of resolution to play with anyway, so you find that these scaling technologies do tend to work better when you're running at like 1440p or especially 4K resolution, because you've got more on the table, as I say, in the first place. But it seems to be working really well. Our 1% lows do drop a little bit nearer the sort of like 50 frames a second mark when there's a lot going on, but I don't really think it's that noticeable, to be honest, in a game like this. The overall thing definitely feels really smooth, and yeah, being able to play at high settings is so much better than it was on that APU. It's a much more stable experience as well, and genuinely, I did think this was going to be impressive, but I'm so glad that this has held up as well as it has. I'm so happy that I can finally share with you guys a proper budget-friendly gaming PC. Now, there are caveats to this, the main one being that Intel Arc can be a little bit funny in certain games. It is so much better than it was now, but Starfield in particular, I would just hang about until there's like a new update. I spoke to Intel about this, and they were a bit like, we can't really say anything, but we know it's an issue, so I imagine there'll be a driver update that will improve stuff again with Starfield. I think the A580 on sale really is a great purchase. But as I say, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you agree agree with me that this is a ridiculous amount of performance for the price? Do you think it's better than that AMD APU build? Or have I got it completely wrong and you should go for something else entirely? Let us know down in the comment section below. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, and really importantly, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this video, then of course you can find that link down below with our affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not bask in the radiance of MSI's RTX 4080 Super Expert? This metallic graphics card brings a whole new look to PC gaming, with a finely crafted aluminium die-cast casing and cooling galore thanks to the Flow Frozer thermal design. It's got crazy performance in the latest ray trace titles and can even be overclocked with ease thanks to MSI's Afterburner software. Learn more today with the link down below. But thank you guys so much for checking out this video. We'll catch you in the next one.